What if I told you that Oscar Piastri has openly declared that he has no regrets about a maneuver that ended up destroying Leclerc's career and that could keep him from the world title? Is Piastri risking his career for a principle? Or is he simply saying out loud what many drivers think and dare not say? Oscar Piastri not only raised a storm with his behavior after the Brazilian GP, but also showed, with surgical coldness, that he is willing to question even the bases on which modern Formula One operates. In his statements, there was no room for ambiguity or forced diplomacy. When he said he wouldn't change anything if he found himself in that situation again, he wasn't just defending his move, he was issuing a clear warning. His style won't be tamed to fit the political correctness of the paddock. These types of statements are not made in a vacuum. In a category where every word is measured, filtered, and reviewed by communications departments, what Piastri said was a deliberate act. He positioned himself as a driver with identity, firm convictions, and a raw reading of current motorsports. It is clear that he does not seek to be the favorite of the press or the stewards, but he is the type of competitor who puts sporting justice first according to his own interpretation of what it means to run at the limit. Most telling was the tone of his words. There was no trace of regret, not even a hint that he could have handled the situation differently. It was a resounding reaffirmation of his way of seeing the competition. But the statement not only had one addressee, it was also a form of pressure on McLaren. The team, historically conservative in its public image, was faced with the dilemma of openly supporting a challenging driver or distancing itself to keep its reputation intact. The team's partial silence in the hours that followed further fueled the tension, and although Andrea Stella later spoke out in favor of a more nuanced interpretation of the incident, the damage to public perception had already been done. Piastri had taken narrative control, displacing his own team to the role of spectators in a battle that was no longer just technical, but also ideological. This is the kind of episode that can change careers. Not because of the penalty itself, but because of the way a driver chooses to position himself against it. In Piastri there was no submission, no victimhood, no desire for reconciliation. Just a reaffirmation. If he is on the track, he will go for the gap no matter how narrow the space or how high the risk. That kind of mentality is what defines champions, or consumes them. But for now, there is no doubt that Oscar Piastri has decided to mark his territory, and he has done so with a phrase that will remain engraved in this season. I can't just disappear. Lap 6 of the 2025 Brazilian Grand Prix will not only be remembered for the incident itself, but for everything it symbolized. It was the restart of the race after the early intervention of the safety car. The tires were not yet fully up to temperature. The drivers were grouped together and the margin for errors, both human and mechanical, was minimal. In that context, Oscar Piastri smelled blood. What he saw was not chaos, but opportunity. From his perspective, Kimi Antonelli was slightly surprised by Norris's acceleration, and that opened a gap on the inside of Turn 1. A gap that any driver with quick reflexes and instant ambition would have tried to exploit. In a split second, Piastri lunged. What followed was a choreography of errors, miscalculated spaces, and relentless physics. At the exact moment when Piastri compromised his line on the inside, Antonelli determinedly closed his line towards the apex, while Charles Leclerc on the outside followed his own pace, trusting that there would be enough space. But there wasn't. The corner geometry, relative speeds, and approach angle made it impossible for the three cars to coexist without contact. Piastri blocked his left front tire, the car became unstable, and the impact was inevitable. He touched Antonelli, who in turn was pushed against Leclerc. The Ferrari's suspension broke instantly. The Monegasque car was out of the race without having had time to react. The moment was brutal because of its suddenness, but also because of the symbolism. Three drivers from three different teams, all involved in the direct fight for the championship, colliding in one of the most emblematic corners on the calendar. Piastri took a risk, Antonelli did not give in, and Leclerc paid the price. It's the kind of incident that separates clean races from those that become defining chapters of a season. What's key here is not just what happened, but how it happened. The inside of Turn 1 at Interlagos is known for being treacherous. While it's a classic overtaking spot, it's also where multiple races have changed course. The difference is that this time the action was not between two cars, but between three lines that converged violently. Pressure behind the safety car, downforce levels, acceleration differences, and the limited field of vision at that angle all played their part. Piastri later insisted that he was within the regulations because he had part of his car on the inside white line. But the maneuver was not just a matter of geometry. It was a bet. And like any limit bet in Formula One, it has devastating consequences when the calculation misses by centimeters. What was most significant about the incident was how it reconfigured the narrative of the race. McLaren lost a key strategic position, Ferrari was left without its main contender for the podium, and Mercedes indirectly took advantage of the elimination of a direct rival. But beyond the points, what erupted at that moment was an uncomfortable conversation about the limits of risk in modern Formula One. Was Piastri too aggressive? Should Antonelli have anticipated that someone would appear in his blind spot? Was Leclerc simply the victim of a situation that was impossible to avoid? The cameras showed cars colliding. But beneath that superficial image, what was broken was something more complex. The fragile network of tactical trust that allows drivers to compete wheel to wheel without destroying themselves. And that day in Brazil, that trust collapsed. The consequences of Oscar Piastri's maneuver at Interlagos did not stop on the track. In fact, that's where they just started. The most worrying thing was not the penalty itself, nor even the 2 points on his super license, but the echo that moment generated within the paddock, in McLaren's internal environment, and above all, in the championship table. In a championship as tight as 2025, where the margins between the leading drivers are measured in points and tenths, a 10-second penalty is not just a penalty, it is a sentence. For Piastri, the punishment pushed him back in the final race standings, virtually eliminating any podium option. The most painful thing for him was seeing how his direct rivals capitalized on that loss of ground. Norris, his teammate, consolidated the championship lead, while Verstappen and Russell closed the gap. That penalty, although apparently fair from a regulatory perspective, has a multiplying effect in the fight for the title. He took points, yes. But even more so, it weakened his strategic position in the season's narrative. At McLaren, the situation generated a deep debate. Internally, a discussion that seemed settled was reopened. To what extent can two drivers with an alpha mentality coexist in the same team without that ending up affecting the general harmony? In 2024, McLaren managed to build a culture of tactical collaboration between Norris and Piastri. But the incident in Brazil revealed cracks. Although the team has made no public statements indicating conflict between the drivers, it is clear that the pressure of results is intensifying silent tensions. Andrea Stella, the team's technical director, was forced to speak out with a position that, while defending his driver, also suggested that he was dissatisfied with the FIA's judgment. He described the sanction as severe and noted that the incident needed to be analyzed with more context. But in his body language, in the pauses in his statements, in his choice of words, you could sense the discomfort of a leader who knows that, beyond the incident, he is dealing with an emotional bomb that could explode at any moment. The incident also raises a key question about psychological management within the team. Piastri, who until now had shown a linear evolution since his arrival in F1, is entering a phase where pressure becomes a constant. Their determination is admirable, but the insistence on not accepting any type of responsibility can have costs within the technical group. There are engineers, strategists, and mechanics who need to feel part of a team that learns from mistakes, not one that denies or minimizes them. And this is where the balance becomes fragile. McLaren is leading the Constructors' Championship. You have two fast cars, two highly competitive drivers, and a car that, so far, has been reliable. But it also has, silently, a potential conflict of internal hierarchies. If Piastri feels that his aggressive style is not supported by the team, or worse yet, that restraint is being demanded of him in the name of the common good, he could enter into a dynamic of covert confrontation. At this point, Piastri is not only fighting for points in the championship, he is fighting for the right to be who he is within an ecosystem that often tries to homogenize the behavior of its protagonists. There are no guarantees that this approach will bring you immediate success. In fact, you will most likely face more sanctions, more criticism, and more pressure. But what it has already achieved is something difficult to quantify. It has put on the table a discussion that many avoided having. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.